Yeah, for sure. So it is the 10th of November 2018. This is the first episode of the Social Dynamics podcast. I have my guest, Dan, the Iconoclast from Sunderland, England, I believe.
Yes, correct.
And some of the topics that we're going to be discussing today are the EU, the migrant crisis, the future of Europe, and how this has all come to be, and our own points of view, positions, and ideas about what we might be able to do to combat the direction things seem to be moving in. So I guess to get started, I just want to begin on a more personal level. And Dan, I'd like to ask you how you found yourself in the position that you're in now. Like, what motivated you to begin producing the content that you have been producing, and what really brought you to this point in time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think I'm not the only person to have a similar story. I think what I'm about to say, a lot of people can relate to, in people in my position. So when I was younger, I consider myself a liberal. I wasn't really that politically involved. I was just a liberal by default, I suppose. Everything in my environment was left-wing, college, university, that sort of thing. My parents actually were not as left-wing as I was, and I think that was just me being young and stupid. They were more disenfranchised. They were Labour voters in the past, but they'd abandoned that party long before even I became politically motivated to talk about anything going on in the country or the world. But I guess just life experience and getting older, hopefully wiser, led me to this point. I've talked about my trip to Paris in 2015 quite a lot on my channel. That was the catalyst, I feel, for a lot of the opinions that I hold now. And anyone who's been to Paris recently will know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, it looks like Beirut rather than Paris at this point. And when I landed there as a naive 24-year-old who just wanted to get away for a few days, I thought, oh, this is different. This isn't what I was expecting. I don't feel comfortable here. Why am I feeling this way? And it took me a long time to come to terms with the reasons why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And all that led to the start of my channel a few years later, when I was confident enough to actually explain my points of view. And
you say a few years now. Did you have internal conflicts that I know a lot of people do have as they're sort of developing their new understanding? Because I myself had very liberal beliefs in my adolescence. I was very politically active, just as well, not politically active, but politically inclined, just as far as my interests went, because there was so much going on in the world with the neoconservatives like George W. Bush. I mean, everybody was ferociously against the wars of aggression by Western powers where I was from, and people just kind of tended towards liberalism as a result of people like the neoconservatives, and just the development of how things were playing out on the world stage at the time. So I think a lot of people found themselves in that position. But over time, through my own understanding or view of the world, I have developed beliefs that are entirely polarized to my past self. But as I developed my new points of view, it took me a while to kind of get over the biases that I had built up previously from my liberal leanings in the past. So on that point, did you have similar struggles? Because I know other people have.
Yeah, of course. Internal conflict. I think that's why I didn't make any videos from 2015 to 2017, even though I wanted to. I remember during 2016, the election in the US was really heating up, and I was really involved online. I didn't make any videos, obviously, but I was watching everyone. I really wanted to throw my hat in the ring and talk about it because it was energizing me. But I didn't, because I was still a little bit unsure of myself and what I actually believed. And So just a little side point here. I think that's a big problem, especially with young people getting into this sort of stuff, early 20s. They kind of decide what they want to be before they go through the issues and work it out for themselves. So there's a lot of young people who are, let's just talk about the right for a second, where I am. There's a lot of young people coming onto the right at this moment in time who think it's a cool thing. Yeah, they think it's a cool thing. It's countercultural. It's, they love pissing off the liberals, but they've decided that they want to be on our side without actually going through every issue imaginable. So, for example, if I met a kid the other day who said he was a social conservative, yet he was pro-abortion, pro-choice. And I thought it's kind of, I'm not saying like you can't be right-wing if you're pro-abortion, but it's a pretty big, if you're saying that social issues you're right-wing on, then that's a big thing, And he said, oh, well, I don't know. And that's one of the issues that I was conflicted about as well a few years ago. It was just an issue that I never really thought about, but now I'm personally against abortion. I don't think it's ever going to change in our society, which is why I don't really talk about it. But things like that, of course, internal conflict is a big part of growing and developing. And the things you were saying about George Bush, yeah, I was the same. I thought George Bush was, the most evil person that I'd ever walked the earth when I was 13 years old, Of course, you watch Michael Moore documentaries, Fahrenheit 9/11, Bowling for Columbine, which were huge when I was younger.
I was a big Michael Moore fan myself.
Yeah. And
before I actually understood the complexities of the issues that he was talking about.
Exactly. And, it's also a British thing. You watch documentaries about America, you look at American politics, and there's this British attitude of, God, how could they all be so crazy? What's this gun thing,
I suppose being exposed to the BBC is like another level of cultural conditioning that kind of inclines you toward the left.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the thing about George Bush and the neocons is you can be right-wing like I am, like I'm, like a lot of people are, and still not like the neocons. I mean,
the neoconservatives aren't really genuine conservatives as far as I'm concerned. They're like neoliberals. I mean, they're all like the Bush dynasty. I mean, they're so tied into the intelligence agencies. I mean, Bush Sr. Himself was director of the CIA at one point, and they are involved with the globalists, and they have been a part of the globalist plan. And I believe policies played out by people like George W. Bush have actually accommodated the current situation that the world is in with the migrant crisis and how this situation is developing in Europe.
Exactly, and you get older, you learn about this stuff, and you realize that your unconditional hatred for George W. Bush when you were 14 years old, I mean, the guy, policy-wise, especially foreign policy-wise, is no different to Barack Obama. He's no different to Hillary Clinton. He's no different to Tony Blair. I mean, it's all of those things combining in one, and you realize, actually, this political class, this political, I hate this word, establishment, actually does exist, because these people may differ on tax cuts, but on most other things, there's not really much to separate them on the big issues. And I just think that that's where a lot of that internal conflict comes from. They think, well, if I want to be right wing, I have to support George Bush. Oh God, I don't like him because he did the Iraq War. It's like,
yeah, exactly. It's like the controlled opposition that kind of creates the illusion of choice, which is what like a lot of traditional US politics, but politics generally, but I mean the US is just a perfect example, because it's like you have essentially two choices, and both choices are generally more or less the same. But then, you get someone like Trump, and you see the hysteria that comes out against them, and the amount of funding put towards defaming them and destroying their reputation globally, not just on a national scale in the US, but the furor against Trump made me really sure that he was the right choice as far as trying to find a solid candidate for the president of the US, who is essentially the leader of the free world.
Yeah, exactly. I've never seen anything like it. The campaign against Trump, the media, just the media onslaught, everything. It's unbelievable.
It's actually similar to the Brexit vote result. I mean, I see all the anti-globalist happenings. Like, to a lesser extent, the Lisbon Treaty in Ireland reminds me exactly of the Brexit vote, how the people's vote, as you covered recently, is just a campaign with so much money behind it to try to corrupt the course of democracy, and it's just any vote that comes in anti-globalist, you have to vote again, and there is such outrage or perceived outrage in the controlled corporate media that it's just the game is rigged, and anytime there is such rage against a democratic decision, then that's a sign that whoever is orchestrating the campaigns against whatever vote or whatever candidate is bought and sold by very well-funded interests.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really annoying once you realize that this is the situation and you're trying to engage with people who haven't gotten to that place yet. For example, if I make a video about, as I often do, about immigration and the negative effects of it, I get a bunch of left-wingers come on my channel and say that, oh, you're just a Tory boy. And I'm like, if you know anything about me, you know that I would never vote for the Conservative Party. They're nothing. They are the establishment. To call me a Tory is to just ignore everything I've ever said about the EU and globalism and all that sort of stuff, because they're a part of it, and they are trying to make Brexit as un-Brexity as possible at this point, and that there's a reason for that.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of money and a lot of funding and a lot of interest from a lot of very wealthy people who want to further the progression of globalism and initiate the new world order that they've been talking about for generations. And it's funny, when I was a teenager, all my little adolescent friends were so like anti-NWO because we thought that's what the neoconservatives represented. But they've all been fooled by the new age globalist rhetoric of compassion and understanding, and subjugating yourself to the will and care of the migrants. And it's just hilarious that they don't see now that the aims are still the same, but the rhetoric has basically been turned on its head. And as I mentioned, controlled opposition before, it's like they set the stage by having people like the neoconservatives in power for 8 years, and then they carry out their wars of aggression. And when everyone is so emphatically against that point of view, they turn it around and use the opposite end of the coin against us, and make the propaganda all about peace and love, and kind of hijack the anti-war and anti-conservative sentiment that has developed as a result of 8 years of neocons controlling Washington.
Yeah, that you're just describing Obama there, basically. Or his big thing was hope, wasn't it? Hope and change.
Oh, hope and change.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, after 8 years of Bush, I think a cabbage could have won the U.S. election after him. But Obama was there to win the hearts and minds of the liberals who wanted something completely anti-conservative, not knowing that actually this guy, he's just George Bush, George Bush light, I suppose.
Yeah, or George Bush Derek.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you said, a cabbage probably could have won the election if it had the funding that someone like Obama had from people like George Soros and the international banking cartels generally. I remember when the initial election that Obama was campaigning for the president, before he was elected, I called his election because I was looking at the funding sources. He was the most heavily funded. He was the most well represented by all the banking institutions, and he was the one that big money was pushing. And I was a huge proponent of Ron Paul, and I knew that he didn't have a great chance, but it's because he was just endlessly slandered and attacked in the media, and he didn't have the financial backing or the wile of someone like Donald Trump.
Exactly. And just one more point on Obama's first election. You remember the man he was up against, John McCain, on the conservative side. Now, you want to talk about a neocon. It doesn't get any more neocon-y than John McCain. Exactly. But during that campaign, actually, it was in 2008, wasn't it? I was actually in the United States for a couple of months, and I went to Arizona, which is John McCain's state. I think, what was he? Was he the governor of Arizona, or was he something else? He was something to do with Arizona. Sure. Yeah, well, anyway, I was walking around, and everyone was pro-Obama, obviously, even though Arizona is sort of a red state, but it's very close all the time. And I saw portraits of John McCain on the side of buildings where people have drawn Hitler mustaches on him and things like that. And it's just interesting to view the contrast between then and when he died recently, where Obama and everyone on that side was coming, oh, what a great man John McCain was. He stood up to fascism like Donald Trump, despite wanting to invade half the world, you know.
And you see him showing his true colors by essentially supporting globalism as his situation was coming to a close.
Exactly. I mean, the point is they're all in the same bed together, and this Democrat, Republican, conservative, Labour, although that's changed slightly now with Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, this is all it's all nonsense. As you said, the illusion of choice. There's no real difference, and I'm looking at America specifically because they if you want to talk about a two-party system, that's the definition of a two-party system. Whereas we over here, it is a two-party system in Britain, but it's like you said, it's not perceived. It's not marketed that way. Like, oh, you know, you can vote for the Lib Dems. There's the Green Party. There's the SNP. Don't vote for UKIP, you racist, but they do exist. You know, it's
hey, at least you have a UKIP in Ireland. Every party on every major issue has the same point of view, and there's not even much point in voting for the most part. I mean, after what happened with the Lisbon Treaty, I literally checked out of Irish politics for about 10 years. I mean, it's approaching 10 years now. It was 2009 was the Lisbon Treaty, and that's the last issue politically I really cared about, because I obviously care about my country, but I never trusted the EU, and I didn't know a whole lot about the EU when I was young, but I knew that the initiation of the Lisbon Treaty would essentially make my country subservient to the EU, and we would lose our power, and that we would essentially be taken over by Germany, who I don't have a whole lot of faith in after the last century of their nefarious deeds. So
yeah, exactly. Well, the thing about, I don't know much about Irish politics. I did that video about that Irish 2040 plan.
Oh, that was fantastic. Great job.
Oh, thank you. I got a lot of criticism from people in Ireland for that, actually, because they seem to think that I was implying that 1 million Muslims would move to Ireland, and that's not what I said at all. I said that the population's going to grow, and most of the population growth is not going to be from the native Irish. In fact, they're going to go down.
People in Ireland love to misrepresent arguments that they don't agree with, so that's all that is. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, what is the situation like in Ireland? Is it just liberalism everywhere, progressivism?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a will toward globalism and a kind of political masochism where if you don't... if you aren't pro mass migration, if you aren't pro EU, if you aren't, you know, that very particular sort of cultural relativist version of open-mindedness that basically prescribes that you have to be open and accepting to all peoples having equal share in your country along with you, then you're some sort of reprehensible bigot.
Yeah.
That's essentially the political climate here. I mean, like Irish politics is just a re-imaging of European politics generally. Sorry, I had a dehumidifier on there that I forgot about just because this country is so damp. It's been raining a lot recently, so that's probably interfered with the sound for the start of the podcast. But oh well, at least I know this now and I can salvage most of it. Maybe I can use some audio filters to get rid of the background noise. But anyway, yeah, the political situation here is just utter control and propaganda, and if you have conservative nationalistic points of view, you're essentially just attacked and misrepresented, and most people either don't want to speak up about issues that are touchy because of the negative attention it will bring upon them, or you know, they will speak their minds in their closed little circles, but in open parlance they generally keep their mouths shut for the sake of their career and social status.
Sure. Yeah, I think when I look at Ireland, I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, I know you've got a problem with African gangs in certain areas. Yeah,
we do.
Have you had any major, let's say, child rape gang scandals like we have in England? It seems to be one every week that we expose here, mainly in the north of England.
No, it's not super common yet, but there are more and more stories coming out as the influx of migrants develops, because the UK is much further ahead of Ireland as far as the demographic replacement and the flow of migrants into our country. Because really our borders only got opened up as a result of the Lisbon Treaty and us, basically having to become a part of the free-for-all that the EU now represents. But things are starting to get more and more socially unstable, and I'm noticing more and more just the fractionation of populations into, isolated demographics and people of certain political leanings. So things are getting more and more divisive and more divided here, but we're nowhere on the level of social problems that the UK is experiencing.
Yeah, the UK, France, Germany. I mean, just pick a country out of Western Europe. I would throw Scotland into a similar category as Ireland as well. They haven't really yet experienced the problems that England down south has been having. And just just something funny about that. I live in the northeast of England, and I walk around, I go into shops, I get my hair cut at the barbers, whatever, and I'm meeting more and more people who have moved from the south up to the north. Lots of Londoners live in the northeast now, and they say they moved because of a combination of reasons. One, it's too expensive down there, and two, it's just not the city that they grew up in. They don't think that it's retained its identity, and they don't mention foreigners or immigrants or anything like that, or they try and be...
They're too careful for that.
Yeah, exactly. They try and walk on eggshells about it, but you can understand what they're saying. When someone says, "Oh, the place has changed," it's not what it used to be. You can basically read between the lines on something like that. I think that this is just going to continue happening, and English people are going to continue moving north to a point where Scotland is just going to be infested with millions of Englishmen. And, it's just going to work its way north. And, I mean, Ireland, you do have a sea surrounding you. Scotland isn't so lucky, it might take a little longer for you guys, but it will happen. And I just wonder what it's going to take, really. What is it going to take? One big event or a combination?
Yeah, I think there is just going to be a groundswell in this country, because over the years I noticed people going from being so afraid to say anything that might allow them to be perceived as racist to just more and more. I notice frustrations in people. I notice more and more receptivity when I'm talking about touchy issues, because I have a big mouth and I say whatever I think, and it just is the way I am and I can't help it. But before I used to get just anybody I'd say anything anti-EU to, or even kind of touchy in regard to race relations or Islam, people would just clam up and start, looking around or looking at their feet and not want to actually engage me in conversation. But more and more, especially the past year or so, when I engage people on touchy issues, they're actually willing to discuss them, and they're actually even willing to express displeasure with the migrant situation and the trajectory this country has taken.
Well, that's positive, I suppose. It's
for sure.
Going from a place of silence to that, you can only encourage more. I still have problems trying to broach these subjects with people in real life. A lot of the friends that I had from school, college, whatever, cut off contact with me as soon as I voted for Brexit even. I don't even think Brexit is not an extreme thing in my opinion whatsoever, but in their minds they associate it with everything: fascism, racism, you name it.
I think a big part of behavior like that as well is that people love to feel superior, and in any way that they can morally posture and act as though they are superior to person A, B, or C, they will so seize upon the opportunity to talk badly about people they grew up with for the sake of seeming virtuous themselves.
Yes, and before they cut contact with me, there was a period of a few weeks where they tried to, I suppose, re-educate me and to say, you just didn't understand what was going on, Dan. I mean, you're watching things on YouTube, you're being influenced by at the time, some guy said I was hateful because I once watched a Paul Joseph Watson video when he was around my house. And it's like, mate, if you think that's what I'm watching these days, you've got something else coming to you. But like, yeah, there was a period of just you got it wrong, Dan, and this is why. But they would never be able to convince me because their arguments were shallow. Why is the EU good? What are their top 5 favorite things about the EU? And don't say because you can travel easier.
Yeah. They're like, these people don't actually base their points of view on substance or information. They base their points of view on sentiments, emotions, and feels. I mean, I think that's a lot of how people are manipulated. They're convinced that one position is compassionate, and then if you don't side with the perceived compassionate point of view, then you are seen as prejudiced by default, and that's kind of how these issues are designed.
Yes, and it happens with everybody. This focus on surface-based aesthetics, I suppose. They attack your character rather than what you think.
Exactly.
Bring up Trump again. Look at what's going on there. Now, my mother is a very smart woman. She doesn't agree with me politically on everything, obviously. And she doesn't like Donald Trump as a man. She finds him vulgar and impolite, which is, probably true. But she's yet to find anything policy-wise that she disagrees with him on.
Yeah,
and
that's the same with me. Every time somebody, because I'm a big fan of Trump, I love Trump. I think he's hilarious and he's doing good things for not just the US, but the world overall, or the world that I consider myself a part of. And every time I bring up Trump to people, I let them have their little rave about how terrible he is. And then I actually just question, so what about his policies don't you like? And I have never once gotten a coherent answer. Not once.
No, I've noticed something in when I'm sitting in the pub with a mate, right? We just chill out in the bar, and we like, not in a creepy way, but we like overhearing people's conversations on tables nearby, And I can't tell you how many conversations I've heard start off like this. I don't like that Trump bloke, but he's right about X, Y, Z, It's always like that. They always have to say, by the way, I don't like him, but it's just a level of protection because the campaign against him and people who support him is so fierce. And they've got to do it.
Cultural boogeyman at the moment, so you kind of have to couch everything you say supportive of him in a kind of derogatory sort of way, just to hedge your bets.
Yeah, which is why it's up to people like you and I to say, no, I love Trump, actually. I think he's great. He's hilarious. I'd love to have a drink with him, even though he doesn't drink. I'd love to have a McDonald's with him, whatever. I would invite him over my house for dinner. I think he's brilliant. Just be unashamed about it. And that's a problem that I had, even after I started my channel, I would go on live streams and I would feel this urge to do exactly that, what we've just discussed, say, well, I don't like this about him, however, but now I've gotten over that. It's just a part of being in this, talking about all these things all the time and learning to reject those compulsions and to just be honest and be unafraid of it all, I suppose.
Yeah, as someone who's studied philosophy, that's like one of my things. Like I really enjoy philosophy and feel that I've learned a lot by reading philosophy books and just about philosophy generally. But there are logical fallacies in philosophy. I'm sure you've heard logical fallacies, like a straw man or an ad hominem or a red herring. They're just all rhetorical strategies that are not logically coherent, that are used to defame, slander, or convince. And pretty much every argument I hear about Donald Trump, or every argument I hear coming out of the left, which are defamatory and manipulative, they're all logically fallacious. None of them are logically coherent or evidence-based, and that's just a perfect sign that whoever is speaking with that point of view does not have any substantial basis for that point of view.
No, and I experience this a lot on my channel, obviously, because people watch my videos who don't agree with me, people from the left or whoever, and they write furious rants in the comments section, hoping that I'll change my mind and delete the video or something. I think it's my most viewed video. It might be coming up. It's over 900,000 views at this point. It's the video I made about Paris last year, where I was basically saying this is what caused me to feel the way I feel about a lot of different issues. And it was an unscripted video. I basically was just rambling into a microphone, then I edited it later. And I made a silly mistake in the video. I said that, I said something like, even my hotel that I stayed in was owned by an Arab. I think he was Turkish. Now, obviously, Turks aren't Arabs. It was just a silly mistake that I made. And I clarified that in the description of the video. But
yeah, it's easy to misspeak.
Yes. But even today, I look at the comments of that video, and the biggest criticism I get from the left is Turks aren't Arabs. Lol, idiot.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what about everything else I said? I've admitted to that mistake. What about everything else? You know, you've got nothing.
That's the only point they can latch onto, so they blow it all out of proportion and focus on that because they know it's all that they have.
Yeah, like, can they defend to me why it's a good thing that you walk through the streets of Paris and you just see Africans, Middle Easterners? Why is that good? What is the benefit of that to the French people?
It's just the will to sentimentality, and I really believe there was a huge amount of funding and effort from NGOs and media organizations to kind of set up the mass migration paradigm, especially mass migration from the third world, because since I'm a child, all that was on TV of people of other races, especially black people, were like Oxfam and Trocara ads for charities, and like every black person I saw on TV was either like the stereotypical cool guy in some 90s TV show, or else it was like starving Africans and like suffering children, and like that has been like conditioned into people as how they perceive or understand Africans, as like just textbook victims to the core. And if you are like anti mass migration from Africa, then you are anti-starving children, and you were just anti-victim, and you are then kind of by default put in a position of an aggressor, or, you know, a mean-spirited, apathetic individual.
That's a good point. Let's look at Live Aid from the 80s. Bob Geldof's brainchild. Just endless footage of starving Africans on your TV screen. And if Live Aid happened today, if Live Aid happened for the first time today, it wouldn't just be, let's raise some money. It would be, let's get them to Britain and house them and give them food. And, you know, that's what it would be. And if you would
give them other people's food and houses, but not our own.
Oh, yes, exactly. But you're absolutely right. You know, the media impression of Africans is either the starving victim oppressed by some corrupt regime in a desert somewhere, or it's the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Oh, really cool rappers, you know, basketball players. There's no representation of the black everyman like there is for so many white people in media and things like that.
What this actually reminds me of something a little more recent was I saw Roseanne Barr, who lost her widely acclaimed TV show recently because of some innocuous comment that wasn't even, you know, you could not conclusively prove that there was racial motivation behind the comment she made, but she lost her TV show, and it went to the dogs essentially because of that, and they tried to create a new Roseanne without Roseanne. But she was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and she was talking about how she was encouraged to have like multiple anti-Trump gags in every episode of the show, but anytime she wanted to put in anything anti-Hillary, she would not be allowed by the executives and the producers of the show. It was just not something that was allowed or allowable. And I was thinking this morning as I went for a walk, as I was like planning what we might talk about on this little podcast, I was thinking of the comparisons between how the media perception of minorities who are actually global majorities, but how it was only as victims or like cool, edgy people that they could be represented as on TV shows. And I was thinking, was it the same or similar as how people in modern day TV shows are only allowed to speak negatively of Trump, but they're not allowed to make gags that are poking fun at people like Hillary Clinton or leftists generally? Yes,
it really makes you worry. And as someone who's had a tiny bit of experience in the media in London, I can tell you that everyone I met was left wing. Like everyone was This was in 2015 and early 2016, so Trump was still doing the primaries, and they were just going in on him all the time. But they didn't take him seriously. They didn't think he had a chance of winning. I, on the other hand, thought, no, this guy's going to win the presidency. I knew that from the first primary I saw. I just thought, this guy's got it. And I got in so many arguments with the people I was working with who just thought, well, what do you think about Mexicans, Daniel? It's like, what are you talking about, man? I'm expressing an opinion about Donald Trump here that you irrationally hate. But the media is just so establishment left-wing. It's so globalist. It's look at those videos those Hollywood actors do every time an election comes up. You have to get out and vote. Yeah, Robert Downey Jr. is telling you that Trump's the most evil person that's ever lived, and why would you not listen to Iron Man? You know, you silly simpleton.
Yeah, and like the People's Vote ad that you had in your video on the subject recently, all the UK celebrities, like the guy from Little Britain, telling people how to vote and telling them what they should think of world politics, when at the same time, you know, he doesn't look like he's in good shape, and with the political points of view he doesn't seem all that intelligent either. So who the hell is he to tell anybody what to think about politics or, you know, policy choices that have huge implications for the future generations of the country, the UK, as well as the rest of Europe?
Precisely. Matt Lucas from Little Britain, he starts off his message by saying, even my friends and family who voted Leave. And I'm thinking, bullshit, you don't have any friends or family that voted Leave. You're lying. Mm-hmm. Come on. You're in a bubble in London. No one you work with voted Leave. Nobody.
That's it. That's a logical fallacy called ad populum, which is an appeal to popular belief.
Yes.
So it's just like, oh, everyone I know is of this point of view, so you should agree with them. It's like societal peer pressure or something.
Yes, there was the People's Vote campaign were also pushing this kid. What was his? I think he was called Will Dry. He looks like he's 12 years old, and you might not have heard of him. They put him on all the news shows. He's just he's like 20 years old or something, university student, but he can speak. He's got some charisma on camera, whatever. So they put him everywhere. And his angle is, well, I'm a young person who did vote Leave, but now I've changed my mind. And it's like, no, you haven't. You didn't vote Leave to begin with. Look at you, not a chance. And they say everyone I know who voted Leave now regrets it. I'm thinking, come up here where I live. Nobody regrets it. People want a harder Brexit than they've ever wanted before. People are sick of it. They just say, well, fuck the EU, get them away. You know, who cares? These people are lying.
They've got to appeal to the millennium demographic, though, and generally, like leftist politics, they generally want to have all the demographics represented. So, you know, they choose people like that just to appeal to millennials and young people.
Yeah,
but use you know, as a political tool.
But on the day of the Brexit vote, weren't half the young people on bloody Glastonbury or something? They and they were flying EU flags in the crowd and things. And it's like, well, you haven't even voted for what you want, so you know, you reap what you sow, don't you, lads? But
yeah, oh, exactly. Like, and how much of that as well is paid opposition? Because, you know, okay, we have people who actually genuinely are fooled into thinking being a part of the EU is a good idea, but there exist PR agencies who specialize in the distribution of rental crowds. Like, there is literally a service called a rent-a-crowd, and if you've got enough money, you can pay for, you know, hundreds, even thousands of people to publicly support your cause and make a big fuss in the middle of a city or at a festival or wherever in front of the news cameras that you have pre-prepared, who are just paid actors who will support any bullshit idea that you tell them to support because they're getting paid to do that. And you have to wonder, with all the funding supporting globalism, how much of that is actually organic and how many of these people are actually paid actors or, you know, plants just put in front of cameras to make it seem like there is much more support for an issue than there actually is.
Yes, I think that's why you get such a difference in the street protests of, let's say, the pro-EU crowd and I haven't really seen any street protests that are pro-Brexit, really. And if I have, they are like 25 people and they're really passionate and they've made their own signs and things. Yet the People's Vote March, I don't know how many people actually turned up, tens of thousands of people marching through the city. But, you know, the advertising campaign, the marketing, the celebrity endorsements, the renter crowds that you're talking about, it all comes together. And yet, you know, people are still Eurosceptic. Europe is still going through a nationalist uprising in certain places. What you see on TV in these marches doesn't match up with the reality of the situation. And
Exactly.
I think that's a bigger sign as any that, yes, the money is on one side. And but I'm glad to say I don't think it's going to work in this instance. I think people have seen through it a little bit. Even if they don't associate it with globalism, they associate it with foul play at the very least.
Yeah, that's actually something I've been writing about recently, like the use of rent-a-crowds, agent provocateurs, and online astroturfing. I don't know if you know about astroturfing, but PR companies and governments have troll accounts where people who are paid to post or have some sort of government affiliation, and they accrue some sort of benefit out of posting pro-government or pro individual propaganda. You know, they support an individual, a cause, a product, or whatever, and then there are just thousands of media accounts, social media accounts, forum accounts who just push one point of view, and it's just inorganic support. It's called astroturfing because it's like a grassroots effort, or meant to emulate one. So it's just basically more paid fakes trying to manipulate public discourse by just flooding forums with pro-globalist points of view, or pro-Monsanto point of view, for another example from private industry.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard that term before, but again, I mean,
it's a fascinating subject.
Yeah, I could get behind that actually, because every time you go on Reddit and you are unfortunate enough to fall into a political thread, I mean, there's so many. I guess this is where the NPC meme kind of comes from as well. Because,
exactly. That's exactly what I see it as representing. Go ahead.
Well, you know, it's like the Russian bot thing. You know, the Democrats were all, they went full in on Russian bots, Russian interference, and you go on these forums and you see people in political debates, and I can never quite believe just how many people are accusing others of being Russian bots. And I'm thinking, no sane person actually believes that Russia has millions of accounts on Reddit talking, you know, pro-Trump talking points. Like,
there are actually manuals on how to conduct like information wars online, created by Western intelligence agencies, that I have linked to in my article about online information manipulation specifically. And one of the main tactics is to accuse the opposition of what you are doing. So when they get around to accusing you of what you are actually doing, then you've already accused them of the same thing. So when they throw it at you, it's just like they're saying, I know you are, but what am I?
But that is what political debate is now. It is.
Oh,
I know you are, but what am I? It's a pantomime, basically. There's no real progress being made. This is one of the reasons why on my channel, I don't really do a lot of, any debates at all with someone with an opposite opinion to me, because, first of all, a debate like that, I think both sides are going in with the mentality of you want to win rather than have a conversation.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
And secondly, because I know how it's going to go. I know what the debate is like in politics right now, and I've heard all the arguments. I don't need someone speaking to me in person. They're not going to convince me, and they're probably just going to resort to calling me a fascist after 20 minutes anyway, so what's the point?
Yeah.
I know you are, but what am I? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, since the Trump election, I mean, political discourse has descended into name-calling and not a whole lot more. But at the same time, I think it benefits people who are Trump supporters and who actually have a substantially based point of view, because if people are looking at conversation threads online and they have half a wit in their head, if they see someone trying to elaborate a reasonable point of view that is based in evidence, and then someone just insulting them, calling them Nazi, fascist, or whatever bullshit name they can pull out of their ass, then it's gonna be clear to whoever is reading, as I said, if they have half a wit in their head, who actually is arguing from a position of having some clue about the issues and who is just an idiot trying to spread enmity and conflict.
Yes, and the biggest challenge for us is to try and paint ourselves as the people with a bit of sense here. However, that's difficult to do when all the money is on the other side.
And when you have a lot of people calling you ridiculous names apropos of nothing, it's kind of difficult to not lose your frustrations. I was brigaded by dozens of feminists recently on Twitter because, like, I only have a few hundred followers, but I made a fairly a vicious tweet about how a lot of feminist culture is just so vapid and man-hating, and how so many feminists are just contemptuous users who have no respect for males or people generally. And one of the accounts that was like, you know, head of a Twitter brigade retweeted my comment with some bullshit criticism of me, and I was actually kind of proud because they got like over 200 likes on their criticism of me, and I was brigaded for like 3 days.
Wow.
By just all these ridiculous idiots, dozens of people, and most of them who actually were accounts with faces were men, like late middle-aged men in their 40s and 50s, who just seemed like they were desperately trying to virtue signal to get some positive attention from females.
Yes.
But like I was trying to argue reasonably and rationally, and I managed to hold strong for, you know, most of the 3 days, and then there was just one dude that would not shut up and would not stop annoying me, so I suggested that maybe he kill himself. And it was only a suggestion, you know. I didn't tell him to kill himself, but he was calling me a white supremacist, Nazi, misogynist, you know, blatantly, like I was all these things. And I suggested, hey dude, maybe if you killed yourself, that would make the world a slightly better place to live. And I was banned.
Of course.
You know what I mean? And now I'm worried about being able to continue using social media if I can say nothing against these people, and they can berate me with all this disgusting language and all these reprehensible terms, and I can't even respond in a way where I'm not using profanity. It's ridiculous.
Twitter is an interesting platform because I was banned earlier this year.
What actually precipitated your ban?
Well, that's the question, because obviously I wasn't that aggressive on Twitter, really. I would give a sarcastic reply to some idiocy that I saw, but I use it as a good place to promote my videos. But the reason why I got banned, according to Twitter, was because I was inciting violence. Now, I've never incited violence in my life, never would even think about it. So when I appealed the ban, I said, if I've incited violence, please show me the tweet where I've done so. They didn't respond. So I appealed again, same thing. I appealed 4 times. They didn't provide the actual tweet where I was inciting violence. So it was a bullshit ban. Now, another theory I have, which is even more ridiculous, right, is I released my second magazine in about April time. And some people who were buying it decided it would be funny, because the London knife crime epidemic was really picking up, to take pictures of their copy of the magazine with a butter knife on top. And they were calling it the butter knife uprising or something like that. And they kept tweeting me these pictures. And obviously I was reposting them on my page. So maybe I got banned for that, for just, retweeting pictures of butter knives. I don't know. It's
clear incitement to violence.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. I don't know. But either one is ridiculous, and it was completely unjustified.
Any excuse they can use against you, they will.
Yeah, and I was speaking to Millennial Woes recently, because he got banned from Twitter, and he used it a lot. He had a much bigger following than I did. And we were discussing it whether you like it or not, it is the public square. That it is the only place online where you can interact in real time with people on the opposite side of the spectrum on trending issues, issues of the day. And it's a back and forth, and you really have a chance on there to reach people that you wouldn't have reached before. And when they kick us all off, it's just a way of suppressing our message, basically.
Yeah. Are you on Gab at all?
I was, but is that still off? I don't know what's happened to that.
Oh, no, it's back online now.
Oh, so, good. Well, I'll check it out. Yeah, I was on Gab, but it's not the same, though, because it's all just people like us on Gab. And
Yeah, it is a bit of an echo chamber, but at least you can reach more people to some extent. I mean, you know, it's not as well used as Twitter, but you'll definitely find new members of your audience. So I'd recommend getting on Gab if Twitter has banned you and won't let you back on.
Yeah, I should put more attention into Gab. I don't know. I'm just so burnt out on social media in general, really. When I
Yeah.
did get banned from Twitter, actually, I thought, oh, that's a relief. Because I
Yeah.
saw myself spending more and more time on it and just getting angry at things. And I thought, I should probably be off this in reality.
Yeah, it's a great way to like build up momentum. Like, cause I'm currently a nobody. I have like 500 followers, so I'm using it just to reach a few people, and eventually, you know, I won't be so dependent on platforms like Twitter to be able to interact with people, because hopefully later I will have my own audience. So.
Yeah, well, here's hoping, man. I would actually suggest Facebook is a decent place. That's where I mainly spend most of my social media activity now.
I'll actually create a Facebook account just because I need to figure out how to diversify and figure out how to reach more people. So, you know, I'm just in the beginnings, I'm a complete noob in this. Like, I barely got the right software and the right setup to conduct this interview. So, you know, just baby steps in the beginning. But I have a clear focus and aim in mind, and I'm gonna keep at this, and I'm gonna work hard. So hopefully I manage to build something over the next months and years.
Excellent stuff, man. Yeah, I mean, the more voices that we have coming out, the better. And blogs, I think blogs are an underused form of activism, actually.
Yeah, I've actually started because like I'm a writer, and like I used to write just kind of philosophy about like personal life, because like I've just dealt with a lot of assholes over the course of my life, and I've read a lot of philosophy, so I wanted to like write about how to like cohere yourself in this world generally. And like a lot of the stuff I've written about is like dealing with nefarious people, or even like dealing with emotions, and how to like think and speak coherently, and how to be comfortable in your own skin. But a lot of the stuff I was writing about was just how to deal with like devious weaselly people. And then like all the stuff I was writing about was like happening more and more in the mainstream on a macrocosmic level. And you know, I became more interested in politics because, you know, I was so revolted by the Lisbon Treaty. I checked out for 10 years, but then things just became worse and worse in my own backyard, that I was like, fuck, I can't just sit here while the world goes to shit around me and Ireland is destroyed and nobody is willing to say anything, and I have a big mouth and I can speak my mind without shame, and God, I probably fucking should, shouldn't I?
And if you can marry that philosophy and those themes with politics and with...
Oh, that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great thing to do. There's not many people actually doing that. I don't do that. I just talk about what I see and my opinions on it. But if you can dig a little deeper and find out why people think this way and why they act this way, it would be unbelievably beneficial for, quote unquote, the movement, I suppose. And I don't like that term, excuse me, but it is a movement, really. It's an uprising across Europe and the West as a whole. And I was really surprised in my video yesterday about the UN that Australia had actually rejected one of their proposals. And I thought, Australia, really? I think of Australia and I just think it's a warmer Britain with the same crazy leftists, you know. And
yeah.
But apparently, you know, they've got their head screwed on a little more, slightly more than Theresa May, but that's not hard, you know. But if you can dig down deep and find out the reasons for people thinking the way they think, I think it's only going to be a positive thing, man.
Oh yeah, like a lot of the main themes I'm talking about are like deceit. I mean, my last 2-part series of articles, it began by just talking about information manipulation and astroturfing specifically, and how online discussion is not just influenced by sponsored talking points being seeded into the discourse, but also it is retarded by people interfering with I'm using like the specific you know, scientific use of the term retarded. Discourse is retarded by people interfering in ways where they're just spreading disinformation and insulting people who disagree with them, and just causing chaos and confusion, so people who actually want to have a rational discussion can't.
Yes.
So, and then I progressed onto what I suppose you could call it three-dimensional astroturfing with rent-a-crowds and agent provocateurs, and just the history of the usage of those and some of the implications, and tied in an allegory from Plato and a quote from Nietzsche. So I'm trying to meld philosophy with politics in my own particular little way. So.
Yeah, that's great. And the podcast is a good idea as well, just to get more people. I'm going to share this, obviously, with everyone I can, and hopefully that'll drive some people to your site. I'll link the site.
That would be much appreciated. Then. You've got a lot of people paying attention to you, so if I can gain any listenership or viewership or readers from you helping me out, then that would be greatly appreciated.
Just be prepared for some people to disagree with you and to come on and be complete arseholes. But that
I'm ready to go to war. Seriously, the culture war is raging. I'm a soldier looking to take part, and I'm ready to hop right onto the front line. So let's do this.
Excellent stuff. Anything else you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I just want to talk about the nefarious influencers operating from the background. I mean, people specifically like George Soros, who are just, they are the people developing the narratives. These are the people developing the policies, and nobody even knows about them. Well, obviously, some people who are tuned in do, but most people, if you bring up the name George Soros, they don't have a fucking clue. And that man has so much influence. How much he has? Over 30 billion invested in the destruction of nation states in the Western world. He has shares in over 30 media organizations. He has influence above and beyond anybody else that I see in the sphere, and people need to know about him and what he's up to. So do you know much about Mr. Soros and his nefarious deeds?
Yeah, I mention him quite often in my videos, and the problem you have with George Soros is you can prove that he's a financial powerhouse. You can do that. Even Nigel Farage has stood in the centre of the European Union and accused people of being on Soros's payroll and saying you're representing his interests. You're in his pocket. As soon as you bring up George Soros to the left, they call you an anti-Semite. It's just, it's amazing. It's like, well, yes, he is Jewish, but look at what he's doing here. Can we separate the two things for a second? Can we at least talk about the financial power that he has? If it was someone on the right doing this, people would be absolutely furious.
Oh yeah, just the fact that he was a literal Nazi collaborator with the actual Nazis in the 1940s. Who's more of an anti-Semite? Someone that criticizes someone who worked with the Nazis who happens to be a Jew, or someone who gave up a load of his fellow Hungarian Jews to the actual Nazis?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He has funded neo-Nazi organizations in the Ukraine in an attempt to, topple the Ukrainian government at the time. He's involved in all sorts of financial crashes. In the early 90s, he was responsible for breaking the Bank of England, and he made over $1 billion. I don't know, was it sterling or dollars or what? But he profited hugely from shorting the British pound, and I'm sure at the same time all the media organizations that he has ties to were spreading a lot of negative information about the British economy to accommodate that little crash. And he's done similar things all around the world. He had a hand in the Asian financial crisis in 1997, and the same tactics. He was shorting the Thai baht, betting against, shorting is basically you bet against stocks, and if you have a huge amount invested in shorting one stock or commodity, then there's going to be a huge market dip. And if you have control of media institutions, you can seed all these negative stories, or spread a lot of stories that make people doubt the validity of the currency, and all of a sudden people start trading out of that asset or out of that commodity, and then there's a huge dip in the market, and there is potentially a crash as a result. And then these people go in and buy up all the cheap stocks after the crash has happened, and they're laughing all the way to the bank, and they win no matter what.
Yeah, well, the guy, I don't know what his end goal really is. I mean, he's clearly trying to cause as much trouble as possible. For what? I mean, what's in it for him? I don't really understand. Maybe it's just an ideological compulsion. It's something he just can't shake. Maybe you've got more information on that?
Well, he is a part of the international banking cartels, and I think they are the ones trying to initiate the New World Order through globalism. And I think if he invests enough of his money initiating the New World Order, when it is an eventual success, he will go down in history as a hero and a champion of the people. And he's just an egomaniac, essentially, just trying to be remembered fondly by the historical record, which will probably be on his side because history is written by the winners, or the people with most funding, or whoever ends up in the right by acquisition of power, essentially.
Yeah, and it's not going to get any better after he dies, because I think his son is just as militant as he is. I can't remember what his name is exactly, but I remember him going off on some people on Twitter this one time about how his father's a great man and he's going to carry on his work after he's gone. And all these billions and billions of dollars and pounds that are just being funneled to various groups in various countries, all with different goals, but all contributing to the same end goal that he's striving for. There's no doubt he's a very, very smart man, but of course we can't talk about him because, you hate Jews, or you're anti-Semitic. The whole the aggression towards Hungary right now in Europe is basically because Viktor Orban knows what Soros is up to, and he hates him, and he wants him completely out of Hungary. I think he shut down his university, didn't he, in Budapest?
George Soros is actually banned from Hungary, one of a number of countries that he's banned for. I was actually looking for the list of countries he was banned for, but Google's endlessly shifting algorithms, which seem created to protect financial elites like George Soros, have hidden the information from me. I know he is banned from Hong Kong and Hungary, but there is a list of countries where George Soros is actually banned from them. And he's very much unpopular in Asia after the 97 financial crisis, which he is very clearly responsible for. And he was trying to short the Chinese yuan as well, and the Chinese hate him. So I think Asia is well protected now, or like on the defensive against the manipulations from Soros and people like him. But Europe is has sold themselves out to George Soros. And even when you consider our migration policy, the Merkel plan, that was actually written by an Open Societies Foundation. You know what I mean? It was supposed to be prepared by the German government, but they just outsourced to George Soros and his cronies, and those are the people who have prepared the blueprint for the migrant plan in Europe. So that just shows how in bed with international bankers the heads of state in Europe are people like Angela Merkel, who herself is an ex-Stasi agent, which is...
It's very telling. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah.
And speaking of Angela Merkel,
a warm, secure feeling inside.
Yeah. And speaking of Angela Merkel, I mean, I mentioned this in the video a few weeks ago. She was the recipient of the Kalergi Award a few years ago in 2010, and I don't know if you want to get into Kalergi, but I mean, there's
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, so Kalergi was a mixed race guy. I think he was half Japanese, half Austrian, and he predicted a world where white people essentially wouldn't exist. There would be mixed race. The man of the future is mixed race. He compared them to the ancient Egyptians, and he was an ideologue, and he thought this would be a good thing, and his influence runs deep within the European Union today, with figures like Angela Merkel, Jean-Claude Juncker. The other guy that I mentioned, I can't remember his name, but Nigel Farage called him a damp rag.
Herman Van Rompuy.
That's the one, yes, him as well, who looks like a Bond villain, for crying out loud. But yes, his influence runs deep. There's an award given to people who are deemed worthy of his ideology within the European Union every 2 years.
Is that the Charlemagne Prize Or is that something different? Because I know Kalergi won the Charlemagne Prize, and so did Angela Merkel and Von Rompuy.
Mm.
But I don't know, is that the same award? But on that note, if it is the same award, there's someone actually from my home county in Cork in Ireland, Pat Cox, who was the ex-president of the EU Parliament. He was actually a recipient of the Charlemagne Prize in 2004, the year before Cork was Europe's capital of culture, which was a big bullshit PR event for globalism
Yeah, of
that
course.
essentially welcomed all the migrants to come live here. But I found that interesting that someone from humble Southern Ireland was a recipient of the Charlemagne Prize, won by people like Richard Kalergi and Angela Merkel, Bill Clinton, all these political elites who I have zero respect for.
I don't know if that's the same award, because as far as I understand, the Kalergi Award was created after his death.
Okay.
But I could be
Yeah,
wrong.
maybe
They might have
something different.
transitioned. I don't know. They might. It could be, but it sounds similar anyway.
Yeah.
Same sorts of people winning it. I mean, Bill Clinton. All I think
Another
of.
stooge for Soros.
Yeah, exactly. And every time I think of Bill Clinton, I can't help but think of Alex Jones calling him a rapist. It's just I can't get it out of my head. And the hashtag
Well,
and the T-shirt and everything. But
him and
yes,
Hillary are
Kalergi's influence runs really deep in the EU, and it's hard not to draw parallels between what he thought, what he predicted, what he strived for, and what's happened, particularly due to Angela Merkel's policy, or that she outsourced to open society, as if that's what you're saying.
yeah.
The mass movement of people into
Kalergi
Europe.
seems to have laid the, I use the term loosely here, but philosophical foundation for the EU. I don't consider the European Union philosophers, and any type of philosophy they're practicing is a grotesque approximation of philosophy, which is all about a love of wisdom, and they're just a bunch of nefarious, manipulative, tyrannical weasels. So we'll use the term loosely. But yeah, Kalergi really seems to have set the blueprint for how the EU is developing and the policies they are implementing across Europe as we live through them.
It's always interesting to me because when I looked a bit into Kalergi, and I don't know a massive amount about him, I've never read his books or anything, but it's interesting just what difference time makes, because when he was around back in the early 20th century, he was considered by many as, you know, this really cool sort of pioneer sort of chap. There's a character in Casablanca who's based off of him. I can't remember the character's name, but that's absolutely true. And he's very, he's been persecuted and chased. And he was viewed as this guy who was really going to fix everything, and that he's a visionary. And then we look today and we think, well, look where it's gotten us. Someone like that, could they exist today? Someone who's viewed in that manner, who bounces around from political ideology to political ideology before settling on some really weird, we should all be mixed race in the future. That's a good idea. Why? Like, what's going on? Just because he was mixed race, I suppose, that had to inform something of his opinion. But
I really think the will to interracialism and demographic replacement is a disempowering of individuals who make up nation states through the destruction of their identity.
yes,
Because like post financial crash in 2008 in Ireland anyway, and I'm sure across the rest of the world, people were calling for the heads of the international bankers responsible for the crash. Like, people wanted blood. And as in response to that, it seems that the efforts to push mass migration were really ramped up, and really a lot was invested in them, not just by people like George Soros, but the CEO of Goldman Sachs at the time, another Irishman, Peter Sutherland, was one of the people who was championing the demographic dehomogenization, I believe is the term, of Europe, and basically pushing narratives that anyone who was in opposition to mass migration was bigoted and unreasonable. And it just seems that, like, when you have a nation state with a people with a coherent identity, when you're under attack, it is just the tribal will to unity bubbles up from the subconscious, and people band together based on their identity genetically, their identity nationally, their cultural identity, and you know who is on your side essentially because it is your nation that is under attack, and you are strengthened because you have so many points of unity to understand that we're in this together. But if you have just a divide and conquer strategy played out through identity politics and mass migration, then people are divided and people don't know what side who is on, and there is just endless division and endless conflict between the different demographics that are played against each other essentially through the use of identity politics, as I said.
Can I just ask, what that guy Peter Sutherland you just mentioned, he was very pro-mass migration, but what were his arguments for it? How did he put it across in argument?
It was just overly sentimental bullshit, really. It was just, we should be compassionate and we should be accepting of people from different cultures. The typical textbook globalization line where there is not any coherent argument, but it is just sentimentality and the accusation that anyone who doesn't support the point of view is somehow prejudiced.
Yes, and the great irony of this is that most people in the West are respectful of other people's cultures. They are respectful of other races and people. I know I am, but when you flood our countries with people, millions of people from all over the place, that respect gets eroded away and you're just creating conflict that wouldn't have been there in the first place. And you're creating distrust of these other groups of people where there wouldn't have been before. And just from my personal perspective, because people call me a racist all the time, which is, understandable because of the subjects I broach. I'm not a racist, and the reason why is because I don't have any ill feeling towards black people or people from the Middle East or anything like that. I hope you have a nice life in your own nation. I hope you can, for sure. Your culture thrives and whatever, and your countries develop and all that stuff. I don't want to stop that. I don't want to suppress you, but when you're dumped into this country by the millions, it's anger at the people who have done it, but it's going to rub off on you at some point as well, unfortunately.
The way I like to frame it, I like to make the distinction. I don't have any problem with any individual, but I have a problem with policies, and the migrants are essentially a symptom of poor policy choices that are destroying my country. So I may be against migration generally, but it's not like I hate any of the individual migrants. They're just taking advantage of the opportunities that are presented to them, as is human nature. No one's to blame except the people creating the policies.
Exactly, but the problem comes in, obviously, where the left views migrants as the same. It doesn't matter where they're from, they're all the same. They view them as a collective block. We all know that there's different types of migration. Sure. So Islamic immigration into Britain is way different than French immigration to Britain. I mean, that's just a fact. Now, if 500,000 French people move to Britain every year, that's still a problem because you'd have vast areas of the country turning French and nobody wants that.
Yeah, it's not going to be Britain anymore.
Exactly. Now, but the thing is, if you have, 50,000 French people come over to Britain and 50,000 Muslims from the Middle East, I can probably say with decent accuracy that the French people aren't going to be a problem. And they're going to just get on and integrate and get on with their lives, get jobs, whatever. That 50,000 Muslim group is probably going to serve a lot of issues. And if that's racist, I'm sorry, but look at the facts here. Very different cultural identity, very different idea of, they embrace the collective identity of their group and they advocate for things based on that group, whereas we don't. And they will form a wedge and they will advocate for power and representation in a way that the French people just wouldn't, because it's not in their DNA,
Oh, exactly. Islam is a doctrine of conquest. And as well, it's not just that their ideas are very different from ours. They're actually antithetical to ours. And historically, we've got beef with Islam as Western Christian nations, and they have beef with us. And it's not just the historical or cultural context. It is in their doctrine that they are to not have respect for non-Muslims. I mean, we are kafir, right? It is essentially they are allowed or encouraged to behave towards us with taqiyya, if that's the right use of the term.
Yeah, close enough.
Yeah, they are supposed to deceive, and they are supposed to subvert our values, and it is in under Sharia law, if we do not convert to Islam, then we should be subject to the death penalty, and that is in their doctrine. And how the hell are you going to import millions of people like that into your continent and think it's a good idea and that people are somehow prejudiced if they don't agree?
Here's the thing. We all know Islam isn't a race, it's a religion. However, the left may as well view it as a race because they treat it as a race. And the Muslims in this country that are from a Middle Eastern background, or they're from Pakistan or North Africa, whatever it happens to be, they do act as a collective in a very racial sense. That's why there's so much capitulation from our government towards this group of people, because they don't want to be called racist. It's really like that. I mean, the existence of Sharia courts in this country should be outrageous to everybody.
Yeah.
But they exist and they operate, even though they are illegal. But the government won't do anything to shut them down because, well, I mean, I mentioned this in another video. Amber Rudd said she didn't want to do anything about them because it would actually legitimize them if they tackled them as a thing, which is just the biggest avoidance of the issue I've ever heard of in my life.
That's the weakest excuse I've ever heard.
Yeah, but I mean, if it was any other group, if it was a group of white Mormons that had come in and they had their own parallel legal system and they were, female genital mutilation, whatever, I mean, you better believe that the hammer of the state would come down on them.
It's almost as if they're a protected class. I mean, like the Saudis are investing billions into building mosques in the West, and yet you cannot build a Christian cathedral in Saudi Arabia. It's not possible. And, Muslim nations, they are not accepting of non-Muslims. I mean, Churchill had to quote something loosely approximating, when Muslims are in the minority, they're all crying for civil rights. But when they are the majority, there are no civil rights.
Yes, and you can see this in real time in Germany, for example, with their Turkish population. So the Turkish population in Germany, they vote for socialist left-wing politics in Germany, yet they'll turn around and vote for Erdogan in the Turkish elections because they can vote in both. And I mean, the goal is clear here, isn't it? I mean, they understand what they're doing. The one thing I'll say about Islam and the Muslims is they understand the long game, and they're very aware that they're acting as a collective for the rights of their group in the long run, and they're very selfless about that, actually, when you think about it.
Yeah.
Whereas I think we in the West, we've embraced this individualism almost like it's a religion at this point, where nothing really matters except what we're doing right now. There's no thought for the future or for our people as a whole. Democracy in this country is a 5-year space of time. Whatever government's in power, it's like, well, what can we do for the next 5 years that'll win us re-election? Not what can we do for the next 30 years that's going to improve the nation. Nobody thinks like that anymore.
I think we've become so radically individualized in the West that we're lacking a unifying system of values, and with the destruction of Christianity, which I believe was planned and a big part of the disempowering of Western peoples, then we don't have any community or unifying themes to bring us together under, or to help us cohere and feel like we are a unity, like we are a community. We're all like individuals just radically isolated, and we live in our own little worlds. We're concerned with our own affairs, and there are so many lines upon which we are divided that it's difficult to unify under any terms anymore, and that's how we are being overrun and defeated in the culture war.
You mentioned
so.
You mentioned the destruction of Christianity, and now I don't really know what it's like in Ireland at this point. I know you guys legalized abortion, which is probably a massive blow to religion in Ireland. I know in England, Christianity's never really been a part of my life. It just never has. I grew up in a historical town with lots of churches. I was never religious. My school, we didn't really study religion. Well, we did study religion, but it wasn't really Christianity. It was Hinduism and all that other stuff, religious education. And people I meet, I don't think I've met in my real life an actual practicing Christian. People may say that, oh yeah, Christian, but they don't go to church, they don't really pray, they don't do anything. It's like it's just a default answer for them. But actual religious people where I live, I can't really see any.
I was raised Catholic, but in such a way that, like, I never really had any connection to the doctrine, and it was just kind of a part of tradition. But as I get older, I more and more value Christianity as a unifying theme and a means of combating Islam. Because if we don't have any unifying themes or any unifying value systems to bring us together, then we are infinitely divided, and those who are unified and act as coherent groups act with much more power than a group of scattered individuals possibly can. And I'm not, entirely sold out to the idea that people have to be devoted religious Christians. I mean, Jordan Peterson's take on Christianity, coming at it from a secular perspective, there is like a new wave of Christians being born out of the work of people like Jordan Peterson, who are just taking the mythos and the stories and are extracting value from them and showing people that there are ways of benefiting from religion without making yourself subservient to the institution or the dogma thereof.
Yes, and Jordan Peterson's an interesting chap. I've never really been a fan of his, but I've never really disliked him either. He's just always kind of been there, well, for the last couple of years at least. But before we get back to him, I just wanted to say, I think, because I watch a lot of content on YouTube, and I often come across people on the right who say that we need to revive Christianity or bring it back in some way to combat, not only to combat Islam, but to give people that sense of community and collective purpose, I suppose. I don't really agree that that's possible at this point. And because, for example, I just don't think you can revive something that's almost dead, in terms of people having, like you said, people don't have to be devoted to it, but I think just trying to sell it as, well, we need to bring Christianity back, but you don't have to actually be, a Christian as you might think. I don't know if that's going to sell. I think the answer lies in nationalism, because that is a rising thing already, and that is growing, and that is... that also, it does have its roots in Christianity, because Christianity has built Europe across time. So you can have that sort of cultural Christianity involved. But I think nationalism, as in what's best for the nation and your people, is probably the better way to go for me. And,
I think that's a fair point.
And I think, one of the biggest problems...
Sorry. No, go ahead.
I think one of the biggest problems we have to solve in terms of this is... what are our countries striving to achieve anymore? So Britain, a lot of people say Britain has had its day. Hundreds of years ago, we were really striving to do things in the world. We were exploring. We conquered. We built an empire. But I don't think that empire was made out of cruelty. I think it was made out of a desire to really lead the world in a certain way. To strive for something more. Then you look at America in the 20th century with things like the space race. So they were striving to go where no man had gone before. What are we striving for now? I don't really know. We're just existing. We're not dead yet. So I guess we'll just sit here and wait for death to come to us. Like, we need to have some sort of purpose, something to do in the world, that something to work towards.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
On that point, I think people are so radically individualized that all they give a shit about anymore is benefiting for themselves.
Exactly.
And that's what's brought us to the point where, all our politicians are sold out to the EU because it's good for their career. You know what I mean? People are just so utterly self-concerned that they don't have values outside of making more money for themselves or gaining greater social status or acclaim. And that's at the heart of all of our problems, I feel, is just people's will to selfishness and the will to just gain for themselves and appear like they're something to the mob of idiots that surround them.
Yes, and it's encouraged as well. It's encouraged through media, through academia, all that sort of stuff. And I was in Birmingham recently, actually. I'm just going to mention materialism here, consumerism as well. When I was in Birmingham, I went to the UKIP conference, and obviously I walked around Birmingham when I wasn't at the conference. I went to the Bull Ring, which is the huge shopping mall. just because I've never been to Birmingham before. I just wanted to see what it was like. And it is, what you'd expect. I mean, trying to find a native Brummie is pretty hard. But when I was in the bull ring, this huge complex of stores and just consumerism, everyone was kind of getting on despite their differences, despite their racial, ethnic, religious differences. But they were all distracted by shiny things in shop windows. Yeah. And I just thought it was really interesting. Like, you go to the outskirts of Birmingham where there's lots of conflicts and tension. You come into the centre where there's, oh, look at this TV, oh, look at this Xbox, oh, look at the jewellery right here. Isn't this all nice? Everyone's sort of zombified and existing with each other in harmony because they're distracted by something else.
Yeah, on that point, actually, I really think that being able to monetarily benefit, or just economics generally, is the grand overarching unifying factor that the will to globalism essentially represents. Because, I mean, the will to globalism is to suit the people, the business people and the financiers, because they have a global market and it's less complicated for them to gain greater control in a greater area. And I think when people can make money together, they can get past their individual differences. But when the money runs out, that things will start to break down, and then you will see more fractionation and people isolating themselves off into their ethnic groups, and in-group, out-group preference becomes a lot more prevalent and noticeable when times get tough.
And that's the point, isn't it? Because I think the money will run out, or we'll go through another financial crash relatively soon. I think you can just feel it in the air almost. Yeah. It's like we're living in a bubble, and we've limped on for 10 years past the previous one. But it doesn't feel like we've really recovered. It doesn't feel like things are booming. It feels like we're just hanging on for dear life. And when that next crash comes, God knows what's going to happen. It'll be chaos,
Oh yeah, all our countries are in huge deficits. I mean, we're operating in ridiculous deficits, and I feel that's done intentionally. I mean, Ireland, one of our last Taoiseachs, I don't know, it was about 10 years ago, it was roughly around the time of the Lisbon Treaty, but there was over 400 billion in gas reserves found off the coast of Mayo in the Curragh gas field, right? Hundreds of billions. It would have set this country up for generations, probably, and it was given away for no cost by the then Taoiseach to fucking Shell. Just given away for free.
Yeah.
Literally. And guess what happened then? After he left office, he was made head of the board of directors for one of Shell's subsidiaries because they had to rebrand in Ireland after they hijacked our natural gas resources.
That's perfect.
So he was made one of the heads of the board of the Shell subsidiary after he gave all of our natural gas worth over 400 billion to them.
That's just incredible, isn't it? And
unbelievable.
And it kind of all comes full circle, doesn't it? Because the left always say, oh, the financial crash, we haven't punished the bankers, but the right blames the immigrants, so we must bring in more immigrants to show that we're not associated with them, which is going to put more pressure on everything anyway. While
those lefties are funded by financial institutions supporting conservatives.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's the height of irony that they support the European Union, which is just the epicenter of things like that.
Yeah,
they should be they should be against it.
The real will toward socialism and Marxism is being funded by international bankers like George Soros, and they have these incredibly well-designed arguments that are meant to drum up sympathy from idiots, essentially, about, we must do our best to take care of the less privileged than us. Meanwhile, they have tens of billions in resources that they're using for their own nefarious ends.
Exactly.
Irony.
Irony. If George Soros put all of his money into developing things in Africa, I mean, Christ, what could he do? He could probably feed everyone there for generations,
We would have an actual Wakanda.
Oh, yes. I mean, we wouldn't be invited, obviously, because Wakanda's an ethno-state.
Right.
Yeah. It's the only acceptable ethno-state to the left, a black ethno-state. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen when we go through another crash. I fear the worst. I think it's just going to... It's gonna.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of there are a lot of problems on the table that we're going to have to face in the not too distant future. I'm 100% in agreement on that with you.
Yeah, well, okay, so we can't cross that bridge till we come to it, I suppose. You never know.
Yeah.
I mean, in times of great economic strain, that's usually when things change the most.
Yeah, people are really feeling the pressure, and especially the natives. Like, there's more and more pressure and more frustration from more and more sources as a result of the influx of migrants and all the associated problems that bring. I mean, yeah, okay, we can be sold the line that that diversity will lead to greater strength, but the actuality of the situation is becoming more and more noticeable, and less people are convinced over time.
Yes, and all with the ballooning welfare states as well in Europe that are. I mean, it's like the NHS, the debate about the NHS. Every election cycle, it's in the top three issues. The left, Labour Party, they always say, we'll fund it, we'll put billions and billions and billions in it, you know. Whereas the Tories like, well, let's not do that. But the thing is, you can't solve a problem with core issues by just throwing money at it. I mean, paper over the cracks for a couple of years, but it's always going to be a problem.
Especially when all the money is borrowed.
Exactly, it's not even our money, for crying out loud.
Just more and more in debt over time, and eventually pop.
Yeah,
there goes the bubble, and then we're all screwed.
Exactly, and I can't help but think that we're going to go through some radical changes after this next crash, and not all of it's going to be pretty. But I think these changes are going to have to be made, and we're living on borrowed time right now and borrowed money. And, it's something that's going to be hard to take, but it's something that I think is going to have to happen in the long run.
Yeah, we've got to prepare for the worst and just try to be pragmatic in the approach to our oncoming doom. So on that cheerful note, Dan, I think we should maybe wrap up.
Oh, okay, cool, man.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I hope we can chat again at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah, that'd be great. Get some more guests on, then I'll come on later down the line. And
yeah, fantastic. I have Rachel Fulton Brown, a professor of medieval studies, up next as my next planned guest, and then I have James Corbett of the Corbett Report, who I haven't gotten a date yet from him, but he's expressed interest and he's gonna find some time for me. So yeah, once again, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to future podcasts and future discussions with you yourself in the future. So thank you for joining me, Dan.
Yeah, thanks. It's been really fun, man, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Yeah, you too, mate. Good luck.
Thanks.